Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, this is The Metro. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, the University of Michigan and other schools have ended diversity, equity, and inclusion programs after pressure from the White House. We'll look at the potential impacts.
Plus, Americans have a lot of stuff. What's behind this tendency, and how can we learn to buy less? We'll speak with an anthropologist and take your calls.
And huge crowds of people took to the streets over the weekend to protest various Trump administration policies, including staff cuts to national parks and other public lands. We'll hear from a retired Michigan park ranger about why those cuts matter.
But first, with President Donald Trump back in office and Republicans in the majority in all branches of the federal government, many people are wondering, what is the role of Democrats? What do they stand for? And what should they do to counter MAGA? Democratic State Senator Mallory McMorrow believes she has some of the answers. She recently wrote the book, Hate Won't Win, which helped launch her campaign to run for U.S. Senate. She announced her candidacy last week. It was then that producer Sam Corey spoke to State Senator McMorrow. He asked her what she believes Democrats need to do to rebuild the American dream and why she's running for higher office.
In your book, you detailed why you ran for state senate. You wrote, quote, "I wanted to believe that our melting pot of a democratic experiment lifted all of us. I wanted to believe in the United States at its best, a stark contrast to the ugly American nightmare that celebrated lifting some up by tearing others down." Why are you running for U.S. Senate?
I'm running for U.S. Senate for a lot of the same reasons. Look, this is a moment where this is not my father's Republican Party. This is a Donald Trump takeover of our government. This is a MAGA party that exists solely by tearing people down and now tearing the economy down. We're recording this on a day when the stock market is tanking. Prices are about to go up on everything from clothes to electronics to bananas to coffee. And that is not the America that most Michiganders want. So I'm running for U.S. Senate to bring a new generation into the U.S. Senate who knows how to respond in this moment and to fight for Michiganders every day.
You've noted in your book that you have neighbors who voted for now President Trump. Why do you think people like him?
What we have to acknowledge is that Donald Trump really accurately tapped into people's rightful anger and fear and frustration with the status quo. You know, Michigan is a state where in the 1980s, 5 of the top 10 metro regions in the entire country for median household income were in Michigan. Today, none of the top 10 are. So the idea of Make America Great Again is really compelling to a lot of people who remember what it was like not just to get by, but to be prosperous. So on my campaign, we're going to acknowledge that. I'm going to lay out a vision for a new American dream that acknowledges we cannot go backwards and recreate the past, but that if you work hard, you should be able to afford to buy a house in the community that you want. You should be able to afford to start a family and send your kids to great schools, have childcare, have paid leave so that you can step out when it's time, and save for retirement, something that I know a lot of people are worried about today, and possibly even go on a vacation or have a place up north. Success is something we have to tap into. Number 2 thing that I'm going to be talking about is safety, safe communities, tackling the epidemic of gun violence, something that I have led on here in the legislature, as well as protecting people's fundamental civil rights and liberties as they're under attack. And finally, sanity. We need to get back to a government that works, not one that is about tearing people down and demonizing people or releasing national security secrets on a signal chat, and get back to a place where it's functional and sane so people can bring down the anxiety and live their lives.
I want to eventually come back to this idea of reducing the anxiety. But right now I want to ask you, this is a time when a lot of Democrats are doing some self-reflecting. As a part of that reflection, a number of them are suggesting that Democrats should focus on class issues and not social ones. Longtime Democratic strategist Paul Begala recently appeared on NPR saying that Democrats need to, quote,
"focus on folks whose names are stitched above the pocket of their shirt, not those whose pronouns are typed at the bottom of their emails."
What do you make of the debate going on in the Democratic Party to fight for people based on healthcare and job creation and downplay issues like protecting LGBTQ rights?
So to be very clear, the push into the corner and a focus on so-called culture war issues is something that Republicans did to Democrats. That was not a tentpole of many of our campaigns and our policy priorities, but Republicans are incredibly good of attacking Democrats and putting Democrats on defense. Something that I have become known for is being able to break through those attacks and go on offense. I was smeared in 2022 by a colleague as a groomer in a fundraising email that she sent out for herself. And in my response, I did not debate whether or not trans people should exist. I absolutely think, of course, everybody should exist and be left alone so that they can live their lives. But what I did in that speech was I talked about myself and being raised in the Catholic Church, what Christianity means for me and service, and pointing out that people who are different are not the reason why healthcare costs are too high, or why the roads are still in disrepair after decades of disinvestment, or why teachers are leaving the profession.
I want every child in this state to feel seen, heard, and supported, not marginalized and targeted because they are not straight, white, and Christian. We cannot let hateful people tell you otherwise, to scapegoat and deflect from the fact that they are not doing anything to fix the real issues that impact people's lives.
So my unique offer to people in this moment is to be able to punch through, get back on an offensive message that is about people's everyday lives, about economic issues, about housing, about education, so that we can appeal to people and give them a reason to vote for Democrats while not throwing anybody under the bus in the process.
In that speech, you called out hate in a way that politicians, and oftentimes politicians on the left, don't. And I think they don't do it because they're trying to be bipartisan and they need Republicans to be with them to pass legislation. What do you make of Democrats who don't speak out as forcefully against hate as you did because they want to work in a cross-party coalition?
Look, I think there is a way to work across the aisle, and that is by appealing to the things that we have in common. You know, the Republican Party when I was growing up was about small government and staying out of people's business. And when you ask anybody in the LGBTQ community or in marginalized communities or minority groups what they want, it's to be left alone and to live their lives and to pursue their American dream. There's a lot more that unites us than divides us. And where I have found an ability to work across the aisle with my Republican colleagues is on things like economic development, reforming our approach to incentives so that we're investing more in small businesses and regional economic developers and communities, and CDFIs, for example, like Invest Detroit here in our area. There's a lot more common ground, and I think appealing to our shared values about independence and liberty and freedom, and convincing people that attacking marginalized people as a way to provide an excuse or a scapegoat as to why somebody might not be doing as well as they had hoped is not a way forward.
Essentially, you can do both at the same time. You can criticize people for speaking out against hate and also work with folks who will work with you on issues that are important to the American people.
Absolutely.
You spend a lot of time in your book talking about political hobbyism, the idea that people are not participating in politics when they're simply watching it play out on their TVs or on their phones. Why is it important for people to put down their phones and get connected with others to make changes in politics?
Well, first of all, the approach, the strategy of the Trump administration is chaos. It is to fill the airwaves and our social media feeds with so much news at such a rapid pace that it overwhelms us and it makes us feel powerless, like we cannot respond in this moment. It is impossible to keep up with all the press releases and announcements and truths, if that's what we call what's happening on Truth Social. Put the phone down and reconnect with yourself. And I subscribe to newspapers. I'm pretty old school. I give myself time to engage with the news every day, and then I give myself the freedom to check out so that I can breathe and think about how I want to get engaged.
There are a lot of people who are passively consuming news and they're sort of doom scrolling on social media. A lot of this can be attributed to conspiracy theory threats that are going unchecked. Of course, a number of those threats have been thrown at you. That was especially true during the pandemic, but we're out of the pandemic now, but we're still surrounded by a lot of unchecked misinformation. I'm wondering where you stand on regulating social media. Do you think we should be doing things like banning phones in schools and preventing children from accessing social media specifically?
Yeah, it's an interesting debate. I am probably the last generation who remembers a time without the internet. I talk about in the book when we got from my first home computer, and it took up quite literally an entire room. It had its own furniture. We had to share time on it. The reason that social media is so dangerous is because it is designed to be addictive. We know that the pull to scroll feature replicates the experience of slot machines. So there is an endless kind of adrenaline high that you get from continually scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. That can be particularly dangerous for kids. So I've talked to a lot of teachers and administrators who have said that we need phones out of the classroom, are trying to do it themselves. So I fundamentally agree that that is something we should be doing. The question is, how do we do it in a way that actually works?
You talk a lot about your mom in your book and her being a really big influence on you. You note the ways that she had faith and persistence. You call her a great organizer. In what ways do you try to mirror her work?
So my mom did things that she didn't realize were political, but she brought the community together. I grew up in a really small town, and my mom organized a town-wide annual yard sale where she recognized that people regularly have yard sales. What if we did it all on one day and made it a community event? And it grew to this event where people from multiple states would come out to our tiny little town, and she raised money for the local firehouse. And it gave her the ability to get to know every single one of our neighbors. And it made the place that I grew up feel vibrant and alive. And what I've learned from her is that is the effort it takes to actually build community. And when you have community, that's when you get out of things like conspiracy theories. That's when you pull people out of social media because they have somewhere to belong, where they know that people take care of them.
This seems like a really big theme in your politics, a through line that is get off the couch, stop doom scrolling. People have this urge to want to participate. They want to be a part of something bigger. And so they should use technology, not just to yell at each other, but they should do it to connect with others and solve the problems that they need solved.
That's exactly right. Social media at its outset was supposed to be social. It was a way for us to connect with each other in real life. And the more that social media companies realized they could make more money by keeping your eyeballs glued to your phone, the less social it's actually become. It's really hard to hate people or to fall into conspiracy theories or believe that everything is broken if you don't see that in your everyday life.
You're encouraging people to get out and to participate, and you're making the claim that people want to do that. What for the people who don't? What for the people who want their representatives to essentially solve their problems and not really be a part of politics? What do you say to those folks?
So I equate it to this. Number one, if you are at a place in your life where you are really struggling, you are doing everything you can just to get by, then don't feel like you have to step out and also add another thing to your checklist. It is on everybody else who has a little bit more freedom and flexibility and is in a place where they can give up. It can be 5 minutes a day of your time to check in with elected officials who should do that. We should all feel like we can step in and step out when we need to and know that our neighbors are going to have our back. But here's how I think about it. We all have that friend who texts us only once every 2 years. That is what voting is. It's the bare minimum. It is showing up and checking in on your state and your country and saying, you good? Okay, I'm going to step out. I'll see you in a couple of years. And then when things start to go sideways, you wonder why. Having a real relationship with your elected officials and with your government is exactly that. It's a relationship, knowing what your elected officials are working on, what they prioritize. And if they're not prioritizing what's important in your life, if you know, then you can tell them.
You're listening to The Metro on WDT, Detroit Public Radio. I'm producer Sam Corey, and I'm speaking with State Senator Mallory McMorrow, who just launched her campaign for U.S. Senate to replace the seat being vacated by Democratic Senator Gary Peters. She also just wrote a book titled Hate Won't Win. I want to finish up here talking about some social changes that have been happening over the last 5-10 years. You've experienced sexual assault and harassment on a number of occasions, and you've been outspoken about those experiences, and you've detailed them in your book. The Me Too movement created an opportunity for women to come forward and share the inappropriate and sometimes violent things that men have done to them. How do you think conversations about sexual assault and harassment have changed since then, if at all?
It's interesting. I talk a lot about growing up that I did not realize how common sexual harassment and sexual assault were. Then the Me Too movement happened, and it was just this floodgate opened of all of these stories and all of these examples, or all of a sudden I didn't feel like I was alone. It felt like just about every woman had some example in their life of being mistreated or harassed or marginalized or minimized because they were a woman. In a way that was very freeing, because it made me realize I didn't do anything wrong. I think that was a shared experience that a lot of women had, but it's not enough just to talk about it. And something that I think is really important is that as women gain more power in elected office, for example, that we put in the work to recognize that for half of our population, there's a lot of work to do. So one of the things that I'm really proud of in the legislature is working with a constituent named Jane, who was a survivor of domestic violence, who advocated very effectively to create an address confidentiality program for survivors of domestic violence. You know, she shared horror stories about what abusers do when they can find their previous victims, when they know where they live, when they can seek them out, and they can kind of continue that cycle of abuse. So it is important for all of us to talk about it, but then to get together and say, okay, what are we going to do now to make this a safer place?
8 years after the Me Too movement, our politics seem really divided by gender. Men of many demographic backgrounds have shifted further to the right in this past presidential election, helping give Donald Trump his second victory. The internet, particularly social media algorithms, seem to be pushing boys and men, many of them, further toward content that advocates for mild bigotry or outright misogyny. What kind of conversations do we need to be having with boys and men to change this? And how much of this is just about the social media ecosystems that people swim in?
There's been a lot of progress for women and girls, advancements in career, in schools. Women are now outpacing men in college degrees. There's a lot to be celebrated. What I think we have to acknowledge is that many of those opportunities were not created for boys or men. Scott Galloway is somebody that I listen to a lot on podcasts and in interviews. He talks a lot about the fact that in our country right now, there are fewer and fewer men for boys to look up to that show in a positive way how to exist alongside successful women, what it actually looks like to have two working parents, what it actually looks like to share in the responsibilities of bringing the income in or raising the family. And that lack of aspirational figures leaves open a void where now Andrew Tate is somebody who is celebrated and somebody who has been credibly accused of sexually trafficking women and girls. And that should scare all of us, that there is this backlash because boys and young men are not succeeding or going to college or finding the success in their careers that they once hoped for, that the response seems to be, we have to take it out on women. We are not successful because women have taken our place effectively in society. So I think it's incumbent on us to figure out why. What are the gaps? What are the issues? What are the opportunities that young men are lacking that we can create opportunity for, so that it is not about who got replaced in this process?
That was producer Sam Corey speaking with State Senator Mallory McMorrow, a Democrat from Royal Oak, about why she's running for U.S. Senate. She hopes to fill the seat that Democratic Senator Gary Peters will vacate at the end of 2026. From the WDET newsroom, huge numbers of people across the nation hit the streets on Saturday to protest President Donald Trump and his billionaire advisor, Elon Musk. In Michigan, one protest began in front of the Detroit Institute of Arts and stretched down Woodward Avenue, drawing several thousand. People chanted and carried signs condemning Trump and Musk. Thousands of people also showed up for protests in Grand Rapids, Lansing, and Ferndale. Up next, Americans have a lot of stuff, but how much of it do we really need? We'll take your calls, 313-577-1019. This is The Metro. Stay with us.